Since the beginning of the outbreak, the question has never been about whether or not this pandemic is dangerous, but it's always been a question of how dangerous is it? And the problem we've been facing throughout all this time is the fact that we don't have the data about it. This is new, so we didn't have testing kits in the beginning. We didn't have any way to really measure the infection rates and what the death rate is. And so it's always been about speculation, trying to guess, essentially, what the data we don't have would tell us. And people have been going off and trying to basically create models off of guessing and assumptions. And while some people will go, yes, we don't know how many people contracted this, experienced mild symptoms, and then just went about their day. But the counterfactual is also true. We don't know how many people got this, died of respiratory failure, and were not tested and included in the case. And we're always trying to go through and battle on the data. But at some point, we're going to have to realize that we're not going to get the data that we need in the time frame that we need it. And we're going to have to start making some serious choices here. Now, it's been my contention that we can deal with a 15-day shutdown. We can recover from that. But once we start getting into the idea of month shutdown or 2-month shutdown, now we have a huge problem, right? And something that we may not be able to recover from, and something that may be a bigger threat than this particular virus, right? So we have to be able to try and gauge, but at some point, we have to realize we're not going to get the data that we want. And as we have seen over the past 15 days and since the outbreak, is that we are starting to get more and more data to give us more realistic information here. And, we did what the left is always preaching, which is listen to the experts, listen to the experts, listen, to the data and the science. But they've never gone through and asked themselves, what about if the experts are wrong? And if the experts were wrong about this, what else are the experts wrong about? And I started thinking about this as I started reading this article from The Guardian. So for instance, The Guardian, which is a left-wing source, goes, coronavirus exposes the problem and pitfalls of modeling. The lessons to be learned from the coronavirus pandemic will keep scholars and university lecturers busy for decades to come. Chief among them is the value of modeling and the fact that an uncritical reliance on their finding can lead you to badly astray. Take a recent model from Oxford University. It assesses how well different outbreak scenarios fitted the rise in coronavirus deaths in the UK and Italy. The most extreme UK scenario assumed that only a tiny fraction of the people were at risk of serious illness. It also estimated that, as of last week, 68% of the population has been exposed to the virus. The study, which has not been published or peer-reviewed, unleashed a flurry of headlines declaring that coronavirus may have infected half of the people in Britain. That is 34 million people. Okay, so let's go ahead and break this down a little bit, because this has implications beyond just the coronavirus. When we take a look at, various issues in which, we try to make assumptions in our modeling based off of data that we don't have. So the modeling for the coronavirus is turning out to not be very accurate, and that was based off of some wild assumptions, right? And those wild assumptions were there to try and fill in the gaps of the data we don't know. But let's take this beyond just the coronavirus outbreak and take a look at other scenarios in which the left tries to use modeling in order to browbeat us into thinking that they are right, such as man-made climate change, right? How much of man-made climate change is based off of modeling using assumptions in replace of facts that we don't have? For instance, what is data that we don't have? Past climate, right? And they try to go, well, we know that, according to climate data, yada, 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 but they have no way to verify the information. It's not like we were taking, temperatures or recording climate information 150 years ago or 200 years ago, and their modeling doesn't even go year by year. It goes in spans of thousands of years. So they're going through, and this is maybe why all of the modeling trying to predict the future of the climate is wrong, right? Because they're making it off of phony assumptions or false assumptions, because they're implementing opinions and guesses to try and replace the lack of data. And I want to get through here, while this is fresh in our mind, because it's not just man-made climate change as well. There's a whole host of issues in which the left keeps on going, listen to the experts, as if the experts are infallible, or as if the experts' opinion can replace actual data and facts. So what do we do here going forward? When experts have failed us time and time again, or they use modeling systems that have proven false time and time again, at what point do we realize that they're not really experts, that they are just giving us guesses, and that their own biases affects the modeling in which they base their decisions and recommendations off of? I know I'm using, the issue here with the coronavirus as a baseline for this particular conversation, but we need to start thinking also beyond this. Now, you can say, well, they're collecting more and more data, and it's like, yeah, but not really, because you can't go back and really collect in the situation of climate change past data, right? You can't verify your assumptions for climate 150 years ago, 200 years ago, 1,000 years ago, 10,000 years ago. No amount of guessing can replace the fact that we don't have the data to verify whether or not your guesses are right. And when it comes to the coronavirus and doing all the modeling with the lack of testing and how new this is, we have to realize that we don't have now, nor will we ever actually have the data to tell us how bad this outbreak is right now in its initial phases. We'll be able to go through, model, and determine as the years go by if this sticks around, but that's going to be based off of after it's been here, we've gotten used to it. There's very little mutation. We've been able to adapt and have antibodies for it, that help reduce, the rate, but we'll never be able to go back and get the missing data over how deadly it was at its initial outbreak when it was brand new to the human race, right? And we're not ever going to be able to get that data back any more than we're actually going to be able to hop into a time machine, go back 10,000 years, and check whether or not the information that the model claims to be basing its climate change off of is actually true. And so we got to start putting a lot more critique and questioning into the so-called experts and what it is that they claim and how it is they're basing their claims off of. And we need to go through and start going, hey, you know what? You can't base your climate change models and theories based off of assumptions of whether or not, you were right about 10,000 years ago. We have to take the model based off of, what we have today and then track it. Because they can say there's a wild, swing, a wild, difference between at the beginning of, the 1900s when some data was already being collected, although it was being collected using different instruments that were not so accurate, and to more accurate instruments today. Sure, we can go through and see what the changes are over the course of the past 100, 120 years. But we don't know whether or not that's actually any different than any of the previous 100 years, or previous 120 years, or the previous 1,000 years. We can't actually tell whether or not there's really any big difference between the swings we see today as we float back and forth between hot and cold. And we can take a look at other models, and read through the models. I mean, I've said this plenty of times before when talking about scientists and, these peer review studies, whereby if you read them, They go through, they start off with a little bit of data, then they start making a whole bunch of assumptions, right? And then then they go through and try and act like they have data and that they are basing off the assumption in order to get to a result. And what they do a lot of times is they take a look at, here's the results we need to get, and here's the data we have, and so here's the assumptions we need to put in to get from the data we have to the assumptions we want to achieve, or get to the results that we want to achieve. You know, it's not about actually following the data, it's about how to manipulate the data into a model, and that's all about putting in assumptions, but no one ever goes through and double checks whether or not those assumptions are based in anything in reality, and never ask, well, how do you fact check this assumption, right? We got to start thinking about this, because this whole listen to the experts and browbeating people about listening to the experts is designed to get you to ignore the fact that the experts are in fact fallible, and that the experts' own biases can bias the result or the outcome of what it is they're claiming to be, you know, the future result of something. You know, how much of it is actually based on real data, and how much of it is just based off of, I need to get here for money and political favors, right? You can't just keep going on and on about this, right? So we need to start, you know, separating actual hard science and information from theoretical science and theories, right? Just because you have a theory doesn't make it true. Just because you have a theory doesn't make it scientific fact. We need to once again reinitiate the distinction between science fact and science theory. That way we can avoid getting into these big catastrophes. And when you ask the Democrats, well, how did you verify that information? Oh, it's science. You don't believe in science. How dare you question us? It's science. Having an opinion is not the same as science. All right. So we're going to go through here, and we're going to continue to monitor as the data comes in. And we're going to try and see how closely the results are to the modeling. But as we get through and we realize that the modeling is starting to vary quite a bit from the actual results that we are seeing, we should start taking that as an indication that we need to start questioning all these models that serve as its basis a lot of opinions and theories instead of actual observed facts and data.